Well, good afternoon and welcome. I'm Trevor Morrison. I'm the Dean here at the Law School, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to a celebration of the 5th anniversary of our Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. The center was really the product of our strategic planning process and serves as one of the key efforts here at the Law School to set a top institutional priority on issues of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, both from a scholarship standpoint, from a teaching standpoint, from a broader engagement with the legal community and society at large standpoint. The center builds on our law school's history as a preeminent leader on matters of diversity and inclusion, one of the very first law schools to admit women in 1890, and one of the first schools to implement a non-discrimination policy on the basis of sexual orientation, among many other early landmarks. And in the first 5 years of its operation, the center has already developed a leading name for itself. It's implemented a hugely successful course on leadership, diversity, and inclusion that provides students with an introduction to diversity and inclusion theory, as well as practical skills. It offers a student fellows program, directed research opportunities, runs orientation sessions featuring customized acted scenarios, as well as a speaker series, of which this event is a part. The center also partners with external organizations outside the law school, including Fortune 500 companies and law firms and nonprofit organizations, helping them to work on matters of diversity and inclusion. A digital training program developed by the center, for example, is now mandatory training across the global workforce at Microsoft. And the center also recently partnered with the organization Black Theater United on a major initiative to make the Broadway theater industry more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And we could take all of this afternoon's session really just enumerating the many outstanding things that the center has achieved in its short 5 years of operation. But we won't do that because we are very thrilled that here with us today to join in this celebration is Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Justice Sotomayor, please welcome. We're so grateful to have you with us. It's especially fitting that Justice Sotomayor is here for the 5th anniversary of the center since she joined us 5 years ago to celebrate the launch of the center. And it is, again, a great honor to have her with us. The success of the center is due really to two extraordinarily important leaders: the faculty director, Kenji Yoshino, my colleague here on the NYU Law faculty, and the executive director, David Glasgow. And on behalf of the entire NYU Law community, and indeed, I dare say the legal community at large, we are just so grateful to both of you for your outstanding work leading the center, for your leadership in this space. I also want to let everyone here know that Kenji and David are working together on a book manuscript about how to navigate difficult conversations on identity issues. The book is slated to be published by Simon & Schuster in 2023, so set your calendars. That'll be an important book on its way before too long. So again, thank you to all of us for joining us for this celebration of the 5th anniversary of the Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. Before I turn things over to Professor Yoshino and Justice Sotomayor, I do want to remind all of you attendees to please refrain from taking photographs or videos of the event. That's a basic term of participation in these, and we ask you to respect that request. Without further ado, please do join me in welcoming Justice Sonia Sotomayor and Professor Kenji Yoshino. And thanks to both of you.
Thank you so much, Trevor, for that incredibly kind introduction. And of course, thank you so much, Justice Sotomayor, for joining us today. I'm going to start by posing some questions to the Justice, and then we'll move into an audience Q&A, where I'll invite people in the webinar to ask questions to the Justice directly. And this is really by the Justice's own request. One thing I love about her is that she is nothing if not a believer in true democracy. And so we're going to split the time actually evenly. I'm going to moderate for half the time, and then I'm going to hand it over to our students. So Justice, we are fortunate to have you at the center's launch, as Trevor mentioned, 5 years ago, which occurred just 2 days after the 2016 presidential election, and the mood in the audience at night was quite downbeat, even distraught in some quarters. I actually remember you walking around among the audience and people really reaching out to touch the hem of your garment, as if you were sort of Gandhi or some similar luminary who could bring sort of good luck and hope to people. And a lot has changed since that time, both on the court and in the wider world. How are you feeling about the future now, 5 years later? Are you still as hopeful now as you were then?
Kenji, by nature, I try to be hopeful. I am very much one of those people, glass half full rather than empty. And I am grateful that our society is giving us so many different opportunities to stay engaged. Every law student should be grateful that there are so many legal questions and other issues that we are facing that they have no excuse not to be involved and not to be meaningful in devoting their life to making our society better in some way. So having said that, am I as hopeful? I'm only as hopeful as law students are. And I say that honestly for the following reason. Our generation, my generation, because now I'm a senior citizen, we've not done a very good job of fixing the world. We've left it with many, and are leaving it with many, many problems. Those solutions obviously are no longer in our hands to find. They're in the hands of the generations that follow us. It's for them to have the energy, the vision, the commitment and desire to want to better what we have. I fear that there are many elements in our society that can discourage many. There are moments where I look in dismay at some of the things I see, and I'm sure others feel that same way. But I also believe in resilience, and I very much believe that we can make a difference if we try. But we have to try. And so for me, part of being here today and speaking at a forum like this Diversity and Inclusion Forum is a perfect opportunity for me to talk about those things that are important to me. Diversity in our society and inclusion of everyone in our society. And so, yes, I have hope.
It's a wonderful response and a terrific segue as well to our next question. Several years ago, the New York Times reported on remarks that you made about diversity on the Supreme Court bench. And you said that the court is, quote, never going to be a melting pot reflective of the country, close quote, because in most of our lifetimes, the court will only turn over one full circle. Understanding that reality, do you nonetheless worry about the danger of the demographics on the Supreme Court getting too far out of step with the demographics of the country? And
Well,
relatedly, are there particular forms of diversity that you believe the court still needs more of?
If you're speaking about geographic diversity, obviously, we're missing a little bit less of this than 5 years ago when we spoke, where the court was mostly coast dominated, East and West Coast. We now have both the Chief Judge and Amy Coney Barrett, who come from the Midwest, I guess, Indiana. They're both going to correct me at some point. My geography is really bad. We have Neil Gorsuch from Colorado, that's still western part of the United States, but more the West. And so there's a slightly better geographic mix to the court than had been. If we're talking about what I saw as greatly missing on our court then and still now, the answer is yes, we're still missing professional diversity. When Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed, we lost our only civil rights lawyer. There are no civil rights lawyers left on the court. Some of my colleagues might dispute that because they feel that some of the work they've done on behalf of the government might include civil rights work, but we have no real lawyer who's been in the trenches on civil rights issues, whether it's on women's rights or racial rights or even disability rights on any level of civil rights. We have nobody on our bench who has done criminal defense work outside of perhaps some white collar work. We don't have anyone who's done immigration work. We don't have anyone who's done environmental work. There are so many areas of law that the court touches and whose decisions impact in such tremendous ways that I do worry that the authorities who are selecting judges are not paying enough attention to that kind of diversity as well. What we do is set the tone for the country's lawyers. And if we're not in touch with what the lawyers are doing day in and day out, we run the risk of understanding the people that we're working with and setting rules for. And so, yes, that kind of diversity and experience is something that I think we are sorely missing.
Thank you. So related to that question about demographic diversity, will the interpretive approach of originalism become increasingly untenable as a country's demographic makeup continues to depart substantially from the makeup of the framers?
You know, that's such a fascinating question, Kenji, and given the makeup of my court, I don't know what untenable means. I think that there is a number of my colleagues who still adhere very strongly to originalism and who believe that that defines their approach to judicial interpretation. I don't think that's going to change in the short run. Whether and how that will lead to dissonance between what we are deciding and what the general population accepts as what the law should be is a fascinating question. And for me, what that will mean is much more dialogue, not open dialogue where the court is actually talking to people about what it's doing, but there's going to be an awful lot of dialogue by the greater society about the role of the courts in our society. There's already discussions about what, if any, changes should be made to the composition of the court and to the court's work. And I think that that will likely continue given the changes that are occurring in our society.
So this actually goes to
did I equivocate on that elegantly enough for you?
That was lovely. Actually, this is another question that goes not to interpretive strategies, but more the day-to-day life of your work on the court. A few years ago, the researchers Tonya Jacoby and Dylan Schwiers published the results of an empirical study titled Justice Interrupted: The Effect of Gender, Ideology, and Seniority at Supreme Court Oral Arguments. They found, based on examination of oral argument transcripts, that female justices were disproportionately interrupted by their male colleagues and by male advocates. Similar results obtained in a study of gendered interruptions on the Australian High Court. Have you noticed this dynamic on your time on the court? And how do you respond when you get interrupted?
Well, I respond in a way that perhaps I shouldn't, which is I interrupt back, which is not the ideal way to respond. As a credit to those researchers, by the way, Kenji, I know there's often conversation as to how much influence research has on the courts. In the case of that study, I think it had an enormous impact. I know that after reports of that finding came out, that our chief judge was much more sensitive to ensuring that people were, if not interrupted, at least that he was playing referee when interruptions happened and ensuring that people got back to the judge who was interrupted. I also found that my colleagues are much more sensitive than they were before.
Hmm.
You will see us even now when we're speaking. A judge will say, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you? And if you say, I was going to finish something, they'll say, please go ahead. That did not happen as much before. And so that study had a great impact. If your question was, did I notice it as a dynamic? Without question, before the study came out. But I don't know of a woman who hasn't. Meaning, regrettably, that's a dynamic that exists not just on the court, but in our society in general. Most of the time, women say things and they're not heard in the same way that men might say the identical thing. I don't think there's anyone in the room who has ever been in a large group where a woman says something and there's no immediate response, and a male picks up the same theme later and there's excitement and engagement. It used to happen, I noticed, with great frequency to Justice Ginsburg. Now, here's a woman who no one doubts was powerful, yet she was small in stature, diminutive, and she had a very, very soft voice. And it was not unusual for when she said something, for it to either not be heard or not fully grasped. And as a result, often things that she had said would be picked up by others and made their own without attribution. It is a nature of our discourse as men and women that inclination of disregarding women is all too common. I think that study, however, had a great impact, the dynamic of my court, and I suspect on the dynamic of other courts as well. People paid attention, and it made for self-examination of behavior, which is something I think your center, and it sounds like your upcoming book, is going to help address some of that. And
please finish. I would be
no.
ironic if I interrupted you at this point.
No, but it sounds like from what Dean Morrison described, that your book is going to talk about how to talk and how to listen.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that, because, you know, I feel like I could stand up and cheer, and if people take nothing else away from this conversation, if particularly men or privileged people, I mean, we all have privileges and disadvantages on different dimensions, that people who are privileged in conversations could be aware of these interruption and appropriation effects that you're describing. I think that that would be a pure, unadulterated win, right, for the profession, if we could just get all of the 1.7 thousand people, you know, listening in today to take that to heart. You're absolutely right that we do cover this. We have a wonderful philosopher that we've been studying, Miranda Fricker, who talks about testimonial injustice, where she says women, just exactly this dynamic, women are interrupted much more, but you elaborated in exactly the way that she does, of saying it's not just interruptions, it's taking away of your sort of intellectual property, right? Of saying a woman can say one thing, she's totally ignored, and then a man can say the same thing 5 seconds later, and he's lauded as having originated the idea. And so we do try in this book to develop strategies to do that. So for my colleagues in the profession, students in the profession listening today, please be mindful of this. If the Chief Justice can do it, you know, we can do it too, right? And
I did it in very small ways with Justice Ginsburg. Whenever she spoke and she said something, and it then came my turn to speak, and someone else had appropriated her comment, I would point out by saying, you know, Ruth was right in raising that, wasn't she? Blank, blank. Just to ensure that proper attribution was made.
That's wonderful. And we came across that amplification strategy with Valerie Jarrett in the White House as well, where she and some senior staff members would adopt this strategy, because it's such a beautiful strategy, because it doesn't actually sort of call out or humiliate, you know, the person who's doing the appropriation. It just returns the point to its proper source, right? So we're big fans of allyship. We are not, you know, we want to put a little bit of a pause on cancel culture, because people are often unaware that they're engaging in these behaviors. So thank you so much for that. this is my last question, and it's a fun one. You've written these incredibly profound and best-selling books, but you have a children's book and you called Just Ask, and then you now have an upcoming children's book, which I believe is called Just Help. So can you tell us a little bit more about this? I understand it's about civics. So what is this all about, and why do you write for children?
Well, I think I answered the last question first, which is I really do believe that the solutions to our problems are in the hands of children. And so for me, I write for children because I'm looking to inspire them to think about the issues of importance in our society, and to think about and be affirmative leaders in affecting change. So Just Ask, as you know, is about children who are differently abled along many matrices, both physical, emotional, and mental. And the book was there to encourage children to see those who do things in a different way as people with whom they can interact and talk. They can ask questions and try to understand them, instead of being fearful of them or looking down at them because of their differences. Just Help was born from my belief that to have a better world, we have to be willing to participate in making it better. And I wanted a book that would encourage children to think about not just individual acts of kindness being help, which they are, and the book encourages those, but it also talks about looking more widely than just kindness, but affirmative action to take care of some of the issues in the world. And so I do talk about voting, I talk about the environment, I talk about collections for the needy. I talk in the book about the different ways that we can individually and collectively make a difference in improving the world. And so for me, since that's such a central theme in my tenure as a justice and in what I want to accomplish in inspiring children, I felt that this was a necessary next step in my children's writing, which was to engage a topic that's so near and dear to my heart.
Thank you so much for that, Justice. I now want to invite our students to ask you some questions. We had 5 students among many who submitted questions in advance. So I'm going to now ask Hadia Williams to ask a question directly of the Justice. So Hadia, I see that you have your camera on. Please turn on your audio, unmute yourself, and go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking with us this evening. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how your values of diversity and inclusion manifest in your mentorship of young lawyers.
Well, the young lawyers I mentor most closely are my law clerks. And I think it's well known that I may have the most diverse hiring practices of most judges. And I pay a lot of attention to that. I do think it's important for judges who are hiring to be self-conscious about the fact that we have an obligation to try to be inclusive. And it's not something that comes on its own naturally, meaning most of us have recommenders, we have law schools we favor, recommenders we favor, Court of Appeal judges who we like. And unless we make it very clear to that network that we're interested in diversity, it doesn't necessarily happen on its own. You have to actually work at it. And that's what mentorship is about, which is working at it, not just permitting it to happen if it happens. And so for me, that was a first step in my commitment to diversity, was ensuring in the ways that I was personally responsible for hiring or otherwise making choices, that I looked as widely and deeply as I could. If you're talking about mentorship, not on a one-to-one, because the people I work with on a one-to-one are my law clerks and not the greater profession, unfortunately. I do speaking to young people across every age group, whether it's young children, my young readers who are generally from the age of 7 to 8, or whether it's high schools or middle schools or high schools or colleges or law schools. I make a great deal of effort to be diverse in the audiences I speak to. And I'm not talking just about racial or religious diversity, but I do pay attention to that, or gender diversity. I think about regional diversity. I think about background diversities. And when I'm picking my audiences, I'm looking for that diversity. So you will find me speaking to kids from inner city schools to kids in rural parts of the country. And that to me is part of that commitment of ensuring that my outreach is inclusive of everyone, not just of those people who are most similar to me. If you're talking about, and now I'm going on every level of this, okay, my extracurricular activities, okay, there's so many of them that it's hard to describe them all. But for example, I'm very involved with a program here in Washington, D.C. that has to do with encouraging kids, college-bound high schoolers, and working with them to get them into college. And for me, that's a very important part of my outreach to the community in DC, is inspiring kids who go to public school here to think big and go on and think of college as a real alternative for them. But, you know, I couldn't even begin to tell you the countless professional things that I do as well. And all of them with a conscious view to ensuring that I reach the most diverse of groups that I possibly can. If you read my children's books, you will see in Just Ask, and as you will see in Just Help, I pride myself that all of the children portrayed in my books are as diverse as you can imagine, in gender, in color, in background, and I make a real point that my characters are as diverse as our country.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Justice, and thank you, Hadia. I now invite Alicia Nike to ask a question directly of the Justice, and I misspoke, Justice, when I said these are all of our students. Alicia is an associate at Latham and Watkins.
Ah.
So, Alicia, when you're ready.
I think Alicia's in her office.
I am, yes. Thank you so much for being here. What an absolute honor it is to ask my favorite justice a question. And I'd be remiss if I didn't just tell you very briefly that reading your dissent in Utah v. Shreve as a law student in December 2016 just made me feel a little less hopeless during a time right after the election where I felt very hopeless. So thank you so much for that opinion. My question for you is whether you feel any additional pressure when writing opinions because you are the first woman of color and first Latina member of the court.
Alicia, I'm hesitating for the following reason. If you are a person of color, you have to work harder than everybody else to succeed. It's just the point of life. It's the nature of the competitive nature of our society, where you have to prove yourself every day and prove that you're capable and that you have the drive to succeed. And I don't know many people of color who don't come come into this enterprise without feeling that pressure of knowing that they have to work harder, that they have to succeed, that you've got to prove yourself as capable of doing more than others. I don't remember someone who once said, there will be true equality when a mediocre person of non-color will secure the same job as a mediocre person of color. That is probably a sentiment, that's not probably, that is a sentiment that captures the feeling, which is, I don't think any of us could go into any setting and not find a mediocre person of non-color and have people talk about them as incapable or not competent. They're just average. When that happens to a person of color, there's always conversations about how did they secure this position, et cetera. And so in answer to your question, I don't know that I feel any greater pressure than I have in doing anything in my life. And that means for me that in every opinion I write, I know I have to give it my best. I have to be able to dot my I's and cross my T's, be rigorous in my analysis, careful in how I phrase things to be as accurate as possible, and to express things as clearly as I can, so that A, I can be understood, and B, not mischaracterized. And so that pressure exists in me. I don't know if it's because I'm the first Latina or the first woman of color. It is just because I'm in the position I'm in.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and good luck.
Thank you, Alicia. I'd now like to invite Batya Kemper to ask a question of the justice.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak to us, Justice Sotomayor. My question is, do you have any advice for those of us who are feeling disillusioned by our legal system and its institutions?
Yes. Which is, what choice do you have? So I ask you that question in turn, because disillusionment suggests to me a feeling of hopelessness and of giving up. That somehow that there's a sense of despair about what's occurring or what's about to occur. If you give in to that sense of disillusionment, then you let what you believe to be the inevitable happen. And I don't believe in letting the inevitable happen. I believe that we have an obligation to work as hard as we each individually can to change those things in law that we think we disagree with. That's what civic participation is about. Civic participation is about looking at things that you don't think are working right and figuring out how to make them work right. And that includes in the law, by the way. Now, yes, my court decides on constitutional interpretation, and we're the final word. And you might not be able to change some of those decisions by our court. But as a lawyer, as a concerned citizen, you have other avenues to pursue to ensure that your view of whatever justice is being affected by the greater society. Whether that's in the legislative branch or the executive branch, in local government or state government, there are so many different avenues that can be pursued to seek justice. In the meaning of justice in the moral sense, by the way, because there is a difference in the legal sense of justice and in the moral sense of justice. The legal sense of justice is, what does the law say? But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the moral answer to a dilemma. You may look at what the law says and say, I disagree with how the law is handling this. I think it would be more just to do this. And that's what you can change. And that's what you as a lawyer are being equipped to try to do. Not just to ensure that the voices of your clients are being heard, but also to guide and nurture people into protecting their own rights and seeking the best way to affect that moral justice as well.
Thank you so much, Batya, and thank you, Justice. I'd now like to invite Wendy Amengual Wark to ask a question of the Justice. Wendy is a partner at Inclusion Strategy Solutions.
You know something, Kenji, I hope you have a male asking a question at some point, because so far all you have is women.
This is not by design. We just took the best
All right.
questions in this round.
Okay.
I
Hello,
observed
Wendy.
that. Hello.
I didn't mean to exclude you from asking me questions, but I was just noticing.
No, I made the same observation, Justice, and thank you very much. It's such an honor and always a joy to hear you share your words of wisdom. My question is in relation to your fellow justices, thinking about what methods you employ to build bridges of communication and collaboration when you have strong differences of opinions, especially when it comes to civil rights, my area of focus. You know, and I'm a consultant, I'm not a practicing attorney in the inclusion and diversity world. So I'm always about building bridges to help others to become anti-racist. So thinking about that in terms of your fellow justices, I'm curious as to those bridges that you build and how you build them.
I personally believe that you have to pay attention to individual relationships. That relying solely on institutional relationships is not enough to build meaningful connections. I start out in every personal interaction I have, but in every work interaction I've ever had, and that includes on the Supreme Court, with looking for the best in the person that I'm dealing with. What is true of most of us human beings is that we all have some commonality of values. Every one of us shares some things that we agree upon. Whether it can be something as small as the importance of family, and I don't think that's that small, but devotion to family, the aid to friends, the caring about the institution, whatever, or the caring about personal principle. I can admire some of my colleagues who are strongly devoted to their philosophies of interpretation when I can see it's motivated by a deep-seated set of principles, because I live by principles as well. And if I can admire them, I know that they in turn will begin to admire mine. And I've even had conversations about that with them. And not infrequently, we have conversations about, you're looking at a problem through this lens. And I understand the importance of that lens because of this part of your reasoning. Now join me in thinking about the problem through a different lens and understand why this lens leads me not just to a different outcome, but to a suggestion that we need to meld this in this case for this reason. And it doesn't always work. I'm not suggesting that it's totally successful. But I dare say that I have a personal relationship with virtually all of my colleagues, even though with many of them, I infrequently vote the same. But I do manage to have a friendship, and I think a genuine one, because I do try to see the best in them. And I try and I hope that they see the best in me. So for me, bridge building is always that personal connection and learning how to keep that open. You know, many years ago, when I started practice, it was very common for people who were in civil litigation or even prosecutors and defense attorneys. They would go in and have these huge fights in the courtroom. And then they would go outside and go to the local bar and have a drink together, okay? And people always found that odd. I never did, because each side was very passionate about their position in court, but we were equally passionate about understanding each other's passion and forgiving our own excesses and theirs, and maintaining those personal relationships. There is some of that now missing. As I was leaving the DA's office, I began to hear about various DA's offices throughout the country passing rules that their prosecutors couldn't fraternize with defense attorneys. I found that such a silly rule. I still do.
Yeah. Oh,
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
very
Wendy.
much, Justice. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I now would like to invite Julia Left to ask a question of the Justice. And Julia is one of our students, like Batya as well.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I'm a 3L at the law school, as Professor Yoshino just said. And my question for you is, what advice do you have for law students or young lawyers who come from backgrounds that aren't traditionally represented in the profession in terms of how to overcome or deal with self-doubt?
Julia, I don't know. I'll tell you how I've done it. And I don't know if it'll help you, okay? But the best I can tell you is how I've dealt with it. When I've had self-doubt, I try to own it. I try to sit and look at it and say, what is driving me to this self-doubt? And I've had it at moments throughout my career. In my book, My Beloved World, I talk about those moments where I failed at something. And I've sort of looked and said, now, why is it that I failed? And what is it that what skill set do I need to develop to be able to do this better the next time? And so whether that was in college, getting my first C- on my first midterm paper and not being happy and going to my professor and saying, what did I do wrong? And having her explain it, and then spending my next 3 years working on my writing to improve it, to realizing after my summer at a law firm in New York City, where I didn't get a job offer, that I really hadn't quite yet figured out how to do legal analysis, how to apply doctrine to facts, and that I needed to learn that. And I thought, and I was absolutely right, that if I went to a place like the DA's office, where you have to learn how to develop facts, but then take the facts and fit them to the law, and argue how those things come out to the answer you're seeking, that the DA's office would teach me how to be a lawyer, that I hadn't quite gotten it when I was in law school. And I was right. And so I went to the DA's office, and once I did that, and I thought that I had figured that out, then I went back to a law firm. And when I left the DA's office, it was a very conscious decision to deal directly with my self-doubt and to deal directly with that sense of disappointment that I had in myself and go work at it again. And so that's how I handle the first level of self-doubt, okay? That's the self-doubt that comes from knowing that somehow you don't quite have it yet. There you seek help. There you ask for help and you seek guidance. And you figure out how to deal with the things that you're identifying as training inadequacies in yourself. And that all of us can do. It's a little embarrassing to go to mentors or to pick professors or to go to people who are smarter than you in school and say, help me, I'm not quite figuring it out. But that's the first level that we can deal with. The second is that self-doubt that comes in and stops us from taking chances. The one that comes when we're thinking about seeking an opportunity to do something. And we look at ourselves and say, I'm not good enough to do that. I don't know if I'm going to fail at that or not. That's harder. That often keeps us from looking for a job that we think might be more exciting than the one we have. It keeps us from sometimes pursuing opportunities that others seem gung-ho on. And those are more dangerous because those actually keep us from growing. Because in anything you do, when you're in over your head, you just put your nose to the grindstone and figure out how to dig out from under. And that's what I do. Every time I've had those real moments of self-doubt, I turn to my friends and I turn to my inner little voice and say, okay, that's what you think? I'm going to prove you wrong. And I go out and do it. And that's what you have to do to yourself. Yeah, you're talking to me. Just look down at yourself and say, you're talking to me, but I'm going to prove you wrong. And then you just got to work your tail off. And eventually you prove it. We all make contributions. If you start thinking or valuing your contributions based on other people's assessments of it, you'll never be happy in life. I look at my contributions based on my expectations of what I think I can give. And then I give it my all. Good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Reach for the stars. Okay? And, landing on the moon isn't bad.
I have loved this interaction with the students. I know when you come here live, you always walk around among your audience. So I feel like this has been the equivalent of that. I do have two observations to make, Justice, if I may. One is that you so inspired me when I first met you, because we met years and years ago when I was sending students to you. You had just gone on the Second Circuit, and there are some kind of nasty judges who are kind of poaching students away from you simply because you were the youngest on the bench. And so I started saying to students, if you really want Judge Sotomayor, you have to tell me that, and then I'll put it in my letter that this person will accept on the spot. And then I did this for a while, I didn't know you from a bar of soap, nor did you know me. And then some years into this, my phone rang in my office and I picked up, and again, you were in the Second Circuit then. You said, This is Judge Sotomayor. I've really appreciated what you've been doing for me. Maybe sometime you can come into New York and you can come have lunch with me in my chambers, or alternatively, we can go out in my backyard and grill vegetables, right? So I myself was a very junior professor then, and so I said to you, I've been doing this for other judges as well, but I'd be waiting a very, 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 very long time, right, before any one of them picked up the phone to call me, to invite me to, dinner at their house to cook vegetables. So it's been a very long, friendship that we've had, and I so cherish it. And it's a matter of great joy that someone as extraordinary a human being as you are, have ascended to the highest ranks of our profession. The other observation that I want to make has to go to your colleague and my hero, Justice Ginsburg, where she was once asked, I'm sure you remember this, this goes to the 5 questioners all being women, and I hesitated to even make a note of this because I thought we could pass over in silence, but since you noted it, and I love the egalitarian impulse that led you to ask the question of, I hope some men ask the question as well. But I remember Ruth saying once, or Justice Ginsburg, I should say, being asked once, how many women on the Supreme Court would be enough? And she said, I think 9 would be enough, right? Because she said, it's been 9 men for so long, we have some catching up to do, right? So in that spirit, we honestly did look for the questions that we thought were most salient to this particular topic. They all happened to be from women. And so we happily closed, the panel after 5 because we thought we had a really wonderful roster of questions. But I did think of Justice Ginsburg's comment as I listened to you.
Kenji, I'm going to give you the background of her use of that comment.
Please.
When Justice Kagan joined the court, the day of her induction, we all met in the back, including with President Obama, who had come to sit through the induction. And he went up to Justice Ginsburg to greet her and said, Justice Ginsburg, are you happy with the 2 sisters I brought you? And Justice Ginsburg's response was, certainly I'm happy with 2. But I would want 6 more to be happier. So yes, and I have often borrowed that line when I've been asked the same thing.
I love that. So actually, I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative of asking you one final question that honors Justice Ginsburg as well. So this is actually a quotation from Linda Greenhouse, where she wrote, after 12 years on the court, Justice Sotomayor has entered cultural icon territory, reminiscent of the status Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg achieved. What is it like to be that cultural icon? Is that a moniker that you accept? Do you think that this is a true characterization? The rest of the country certainly does. And if so, what does it feel like?
I had a child when my first book came out, My Beloved World, in an audience who asked me, and I still remember the question, what does it feel like to be a part of history? And that question has somewhat of the same feel. And I haven't come up with a better answer than to say the following. I don't live with that feeling of being a part of history or being an icon, as Linda might have described me, because it doesn't get me anywhere. I have to concentrate on today, on ensuring that what I do today is meaningful and important. That that what I'm doing has a purpose and that it gives. And so, no, I don't own it. I don't live it. I smile at it. When you see your face on socks, it is kind of funny. As you may know, my mother recently passed away. But one of the moments of pure joy she had in the couple of months before she passed was that a friend of mine from Texas sent me a large candle with my face on it, dressed as a saint of some sort. And I looked at this and it was a little strange, okay? Irreverent as far as I was concerned. But my mother just laughed and laughed and laughed, and she just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And at one point I looked at her and I said, "You gotta know they don't know that I'm really not a saint, don't you?" And she said, "Yeah, they should know better." And we were both hysterical. Well, I want to keep that sense of disbelief, of that sense of just taking it as not too important, because what is important is what I do today and tomorrow, not what I've done, but what I will do. And that's what I concentrate on.
Thank you so much, Justice. I will also say, off of one of your responses to the earlier question about finding commonalities with your colleagues, I actually teach my kids this, quoting you, because you once said to me, I have something to learn from almost every person I meet. And I love the fact that you said, finding the good in people, finding the commonalities with other people. But I have to say, I also love the almost, right? So you had that kind of healthy dollop of realism that said, well, there may be some people where maybe I don't have that much to learn from this person today. Maybe I'll find something tomorrow, right?
No, there is always some good in most everyone.
Yeah.
Now, having been a prosecutor, occasionally there are people who challenge that premise, who make you stop and think, is there really? But I have found that is genuinely true, virtually always.
Before we close, Justice, do you have any final words, anything that we didn't get to on diversity and inclusion, on our audience of students that you'd like to share?
Kenji, I hope that your audience understands how passionate I am about the law. I truly believe that the law is such an important part of our relationship as people. It guides those relationships. It helps us share limited resources. It helps defines the boundaries of what we do with each other or can't do with each other. And in every aspect of our life, laws play a role. And for me, I have always loved being a lawyer. I've loved being a judge, whether it was on the district court, the Court of Appeals, and now on the Supreme Court. I am passionate about what I do. I'm passionate about the law as an important part of our society's relationships. And I hope that the students in the audience come away both with in their studies, but in their practice with the same excitement that I have. Because it can be an exceedingly rewarding career. And it can help teach you so much, and you can help make so many contributions in the profession and in the world. We are, the legal profession is the only one where we take on an affirmative duty to help people without resources. Think of doctors. They take the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm. None of them take an oath to treat patients without pay. We're asked to take on, and do often take on, pro bono work as a service to our profession and to our community. This is a unique in our profession. And I hope that all of you who are seeking to pursue it, keep that foremost in your life, as those moments of disappointment will arise, because they will. But keep your eye on what's important. And so I don't know if that's what you were seeking, Kenji, but that's the feeling I have in terms of speaking to student audiences, trying to keep their hope alive.
I can't think of a better note to end on. I'm only sorry we're meeting virtually so that you can't hear the standing ovation that is would otherwise have come your way. Justice Sotomayor, cultural icon, national treasure. Thank you so much for coming back to celebrate the 5th anniversary of our center, and more importantly, for reminding us of the nobility of our profession.
Thank you, Kenji. My love to the family.
Be well.